This is a 2011 Mac Mini. Design-wise, the Mac Mini has actually stayed almost exactly the same since 2010. Here's the 2010 and the latest 2023 Mac Minis together. Their dimensions are exactly the same, with the removal of the disk drive slot among the only noticeable differences between the two. For these computers then, it's clearly what's on the inside that counts. This 2011 Mac Mini runs a dual-core Intel i5, specifically the 2415M. I rarely outline the exact CPU model when discussing Macs, but this time it's important. The M at the end of the name means it's a mobile processor, one intended for a laptop or something small and low-powered like the Mac Mini that it's inside. During the 2010s, a lot of professionals working on big projects on their computers would have had a laptop that they could take home or travel with, or they'd have a Mac Mini like this one they could keep at their own home. These machines were pretty popular with the regular consumer too, who needed something to browse the web, watch films with, and more. While the mobile chips were reasonably capable, the real work was left for the desktop towers. The 2010 Mac Pro, for example, had processors with up to 12 cores inside. This was at a time when even the most powerful MacBook had just 2 cores. Broadly speaking, size is the determining factor here. The Mac Mini is just 3.6 cm tall and 19.7 cm wide and long. There isn't enough space inside the case to have a power supply capable of powering a big chip like an Intel Xeon or a desktop i7. When you're working with processors like those that slurp through hundreds of watts of power, heat starts to become an issue. Desktops like the 2010 Mac Pro have big metal heatsinks covering the chips, with several fans keeping the entire machine cool constantly. Practically, there's only enough space in this small Mac Mini body to have 1 or 2 fans at absolute maximum. The fan inside this thing is not a desktop cooler either, more of a laptop fan. Let's quickly compare some benchmarks. This 2011 Mac Mini has a score of 480 in Geekbench 6's single-core test. The Mac Pro from a year earlier manages 530. Not a huge difference, but in the multi-core benchmark, the Mac Pro Tower starts to pull dramatically ahead. The Mac Mini scores 964 here, with the Mac Pro almost 4 times higher at 3,774. Remember, these machines were released around the same time, with the Mac Pro actually a year older than this Mini. The trend of the bigger full-size computer being able to do the legwork more easily continued right through to the end of the 2010s. In 2019, Apple gave the MacBook Pro a really good go at performing equally to the desktop Mac Pro and iMac Pro machines. It was built around the 8-core Intel i9 processor, and an impressive AMD Radeon GPU. Both CPU and GPU were still just mobile versions of the latest and greatest desktop parts though, and the entire laptop was known for overheating due to such powerful parts being dropped on such a thin case. The Mac Pro from 2019 had the full shebang, with up to 28 cores on board. At the time, this was among the most powerful computers money could buy. Once again, a look at benchmarks shows us just how big a gap there is between the full desktop Mac experience and using a lower power machine like the Mac Mini or the MacBook Pro. 4 years ago, this structure differentiating Apple's tiers of devices got turned on its head. Most of you will know that 2020 was the year Apple released the M1 chip, the first of their own line of computer processors. M1 released on the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini in 2020, giving each device a significant improvement over the previous year's version. People slowly began to realise though, Apple Silicon wasn't just a way of improving low power performance on smaller machines, it could outmuscle even the full power desktop ones in some cases. The 2020 Mac Mini was capable of trading blows with the Mac Pro from 2019, as you can see. While the Mac Pro had started at $6,000, the Mini could be bought for just $700. Performance difference? Well, the Mac Mini's GPU was markedly weaker than the Pro machine, but the CPUs were really on a similar level. There may have been many times more RAM inside the Mac Pro, but huge RAM capacities are often only used under certain workloads. If 2020 was the beginning of the end for the full-size desktop Mac, then 2021, 2 and 3 were the final nails in the coffin. 2021 brought the M1 Pro and M1 Max processors, which perhaps most significantly came with serious graphical improvements, as well as RAM configurations up to 64GB. This really beefed up the MacBook Pro lineup. In 2022 came the M1 Ultra, essentially two M1 Max chips together to make something significantly more powerful. The M1 Ultra was only available on the Mac Studio, which was also new for 2022. More on that later. 2023 brought about the M2 Pro Mac Mini. This gave another huge boost to the abilities embedded within this tiny chassis. So that's where we are at the moment. This 2011 Mac Mini was a shadow of the Mac Pro sold alongside it. The professionals setting their sights on producing high quality content in the form of games, films and more were certainly more interested in using the bigger machines where possible. Despite saving them time and improving workflow hugely, this came at a cost, with the Mac Pro going for almost $2,000 more at its base configuration. Cost of purchase wasn't the only problem though. Mac Pro units were and still are huge, even as PCs go. The 2010's case was almost 2 feet tall and 2 feet deep, far from easy to move, let alone something you could work with on the go. Right now, you can buy a Mac Mini for around $1,000 brand new from Apple, and essentially have all of the features needed to run a pretty professional editing, development, or production rig. The Intel Mac Pro appealed to some buyers as a server tower, as well as something that could run huge amounts of RAM for crazy projects. So sure, maybe Apple have cut out the very top 1% of their customers by going Apple Silicon only, but these days it's safe to say video production, music, photo work, web stuff, and a huge range of software development can be done without having to buy a full-size desktop tower. I think the word professional is certainly up for debate, by the way. I'll be looking at just what makes a pro user next week. Despite changing very little on the outside, the Mac Mini has come a long way. If you need a little more power, the Mac Studio is hard to beat, both in terms of value and performance. So what remains of the Mac Pro? Well, Apple still sells the machine. It starts at $7,000, yet is equipped with the same SoC as the build-to-order Mac Studio. It has a couple more ports and can be bought with $800 wheels, which I'm sure is a justifiable purchase for some. Users are able to upgrade the SSDs inside the thing after purchase, but they need to be very specific models and don't come cheap. Everything else is broadly the same as buying a smaller Mac Studio, which will save you thousands of dollars at purchase. It's safe to say that thanks to M1 and the other Apple Silicon chips, the Mac Mini, Mac Studio, and even MacBook Pros are putting a significant dent in the Mac Pro Tower sales. I mean, who wouldn't choose a machine the size of the Adventures of Tintin 21 episode box set over something as big and expensive as the Mac Pro? Thank you very much for watching. If you fancy contributing to the channel financially, Patreon membership starts at $2.99. There's lots more old Mac talk in the Discord server linked down below. As always, see you next week.